A man in the audience stood up and saluted. Johnny Carson set down his microphone and told a story he never shared in 28 years. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank. March 1978. Another Tuesday night. Another packed house. Another monologue about politics and celebrities and the mundane absurdities of American life delivered with Johnny's trademark timing. Everything was routine. Everything was safe. Everything was exactly what 15 million viewers tuned in for at 11:30 p.m. Until a Vietnam veteran stood up in the fourth row and raised his hand in a military salute. Johnny was mid-joke. Something about gas prices and President Carter. The audience was laughing. Ed McMahon was doing his signature chuckle at the desk. Doc Severinsen's band was ready with the next musical cue. The cameras were rolling smoothly through another flawless broadcast. And then Johnny saw the salute. His voice stopped mid-sentence. His smile vanished. His entire body went rigid, one hand instinctively rising to his chest as if returning the gesture. The blue cue cards he'd been reading from scattered across his desk as his other hand released them. The audience noticed immediately. The laughter died. 300 people suddenly uncertain what they were witnessing. The cameras stayed locked on Johnny's face, capturing an expression America had never seen on their beloved late-night host. Complete vulnerability. The man in the fourth row held his salute. Ramrod straight. Civilian clothes but unmistakable military bearing. His eyes locked on Johnny with a respect and recognition that transcended the boundary between performer and audience. Johnny Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. The control room erupted into confusion. Director Bobby Quinn leaned into his microphone. "Johnny? Are we okay? Do we go to commercial?" Johnny didn't respond. He was staring at the veteran, his hands still raised halfway to his chest, frozen in this moment that had ambushed him on live television. Ed McMahon shifted in his chair. "Johnny?" His voice carried genuine concern. In all their years together, Ed had never seen Johnny like this. Johnny finally lowered his hand. He looked at Ed, then at the audience, then directly into camera one. When he spoke, his voice was different. Stripped of the performer's polish, raw and honest in a way that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "That salute," Johnny said quietly. I haven't seen that in a long time." The veteran in the fourth row slowly lowered his hand but remained standing. His face showed emotion now, tears gathering in his eyes but his military composure holding firm. "Sir," Johnny said, addressing the man directly, breaking every protocol of how hosts interact with audiences. "Were you in Vietnam?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. First Cavalry Division. 2 tours, 68 and 70. "What's your name?" "Daniel Foster, sir." Johnny nodded slowly, processing something. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Why did you salute me just now?" Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "Because I know, sir. I know what you did. And I wanted you to know that it mattered. That we remember." The audience was completely silent. No one understood what was happening, but everyone sensed it was profound. Doc Severinsen had lowered his trumpet. The band sat motionless. Even the camera operators seemed to move more carefully, aware they were capturing something significant. "You know," Johnny repeated quietly. He looked down at his desk, at the scattered cue cards, at the coffee mug and the pen and all the props of his carefully constructed late-night kingdom. When he looked back up, his eyes were glistening. "Folks," Johnny said, addressing the full audience now, "I've been doing this show for 16 years. And in all that time, I've never talked about something. Never mentioned it. Not once. But I think maybe it's time." He gestured to Daniel. "Would you come down here? Please. I need you down here for this." Daniel made his way down the aisle, moving with that distinctive military gait even in civilian clothes. Johnny stepped out from behind his desk, another break in protocol, and met Daniel at the edge of the stage. They shook hands, and Johnny guided him to sit in one of the guest chairs. Johnny sat in the other chair, abandoning his desk completely, just two men talking. "Before I was Johnny Carson," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "Before I was on television, before any of this, I was Ensign John William Carson, United States Navy." The audience gasped. In 16 years of hosting The Tonight Show, through thousands of monologues and interviews and sketches, Johnny Carson had never mentioned military service. "I served during World War II," Johnny continued. "I was stationed on the USS Pennsylvania. I was 20 years old, and I was scared out of my mind every single day. We saw combat in the Pacific Theater. We were at Okinawa. And I saw things that..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I saw things that stayed with me." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand why Johnny Carson had never spoken about this. In 1945, Johnny was serving as a communications officer on the USS Pennsylvania when the battleship came under kamikaze attack off the coast of Okinawa. He was on deck when the plane hit. The explosion killed 20 men instantly. Johnny survived with minor injuries, physically. But he'd been standing next to his best friend, a kid from Iowa named Thomas Reed, when the impact came. Thomas didn't make it. Johnny had held him while he died. 20 years old, both of them, thousands of miles from home, and Johnny had watched the life drain from his friend's eyes while the ship burned around them. After the war, Johnny came home to Nebraska. He went to college. He got into radio. Then television. He built a career making people laugh. And he never, ever talked about Thomas Reed or the USS Pennsylvania or what it felt like to be 20 years old and covered in your best friend's blood. He buried it. Locked it away. Became Johnny Carson, America's favorite late-night host, the man who made the country laugh before they went to sleep. The war became something that happened to someone else, in another life, that had nothing to do with the persona he'd built. For 33 years, from 1945 to 1978, Johnny Carson kept that promise to himself. The war was over. Thomas was gone. And talking about it wouldn't bring him back. Until Daniel Foster stood up and saluted him on live television. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. From behind his driver's license and credit cards, he extracted a small, worn photograph. He held it up for Daniel to see. "This is Thomas Reed," Johnny said. "He was my best friend. He was 20 years old when he died at Okinawa. I was holding him when it happened." Daniel looked at the photograph, then at Johnny, tears now streaming freely down his face. "I'm sorry, sir. I've carried this picture for 33 years, Johnny continued. "Every day. In every wallet I've ever owned. And I've never told anyone about it. Not my wives. Not my kids. Not Ed." He glanced at Ed McMahon, who was crying openly now at the desk. I couldn't talk about it. It felt like if I talked about it, if I made it part of my public life, it would cheapen what Thomas went through. What we all went through." He looked at Daniel. "But when you stood up and saluted me, something changed. Because you were there. Not on my ship, not in my war, but you were there. You understand what it means to watch your friends die. To come home and try to be normal. To build a life on top of a foundation that has bodies buried in it." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Johnny looked at the audience. "I stopped talking about the war because I thought that's what you do. You come home, you move on, you don't burden other people with it. But I think I was wrong. I think maybe we're supposed to talk about it. Not to glorify it or relive it, but to honor the people who didn't come home. To remember that they mattered." He held up the photograph of Thomas Reed again. Tom wanted to be a teacher. He loved kids. He would have been great at it. But he died on a battleship in the Pacific when he was 20 years old, and the world never got to see what he could have become. The studio was absolutely silent except for the sound of people crying. Not just the audience, the crew, the band, the producers in the control room. Everyone. Johnny looked at Daniel. You saluted me because you thought I deserved recognition. But I don't. Thomas deserves recognition. And every soldier who came home from Vietnam to a country that didn't want to hear about it deserves recognition. You served 2 tours. You came home. You're sitting here. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Daniel wiped his eyes. With respect, sir, you've given more to this country than you know. You've made us laugh for 16 years. After Vietnam, after everything, you gave us something good to watch. Something that wasn't about war or politics or anger. That matters too. Johnny smiled sadly. Thank you for that. But I think tonight, I needed to remember that I was a sailor before I was a comedian. That I served with men who gave everything. And that I owe it to them to remember. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny stood up and extended his hand to Daniel. But instead of shaking it, Daniel stood at attention and saluted again, crisp, perfect, respectful. And Johnny Carson, for the first time in 33 years, returned a military salute. The audience erupted. Not in applause, not yet. In that collective gasp that happens when 300 people witness something sacred. Then they stood, all of them, and the applause came, thunderous, sustained, cathartic. Doc Severinson's band began playing softly. Not a comedy bumper. Something reverent. The cameras captured everything. Johnny and Daniel standing together, Ed McMahon wiping tears, the audience on their feet, the moment when late-night television became something more than entertainment. Johnny embraced Daniel. 2 veterans from different wars, from different generations, connected by the unspoken understanding of what service costs. When they finally separated, Johnny turned to camera 1. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the departure from our usual program. But some things are more important than comedy. Daniel, thank you for your service. And thank you for reminding me that some stories need to be told. He looked at the photograph of Thomas Reed one more time, then carefully placed it back in his wallet. We'll be right back. The show went to commercial. During the break, Johnny told the producers not to cut any of it. America needs to see this, he said. All of it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. That night changed everything. Johnny Carson received thousands of letters from veterans thanking him for finally talking about his service. Daniel Foster became a regular correspondent with Johnny, and they remained friends for years. Johnny kept Thomas Reed's photograph in his wallet until the day he died in 2005. After his death, the photograph was donated to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, where it remains on display with a placard that reads, "Carried by Johnny Carson for 60 years. In memory of Ensign Thomas Reed, USS Pennsylvania, killed in action at Okinawa, 1945. And every late-night host who came after Johnny, Letterman, Leno, Conan, Fallon, remembers March 1978 as the night television proved it could be more than entertainment. It could be healing. It could be remembrance. It could honor the fallen. Because sometimes, a salute is more powerful than a punchline. The Tonight Show never played reruns of that episode. It didn't need to. The moment lived in the memories of everyone who witnessed it. The audience who was there, the millions watching at home, the crew who stopped working to watch 2 men honor the past. Years later, when Johnny Carson gave his final Tonight Show broadcast in 1992, Daniel Foster was in the audience again. This time in the front row. And as Johnny said his last goodbye to America, as he fought back tears and thanked everyone who had made his career possible, he paused before his final words. He looked directly at Daniel. And he placed his hand over his heart. Daniel stood and saluted one last time. Johnny nodded, a small gesture, barely noticeable to most viewers, but everything to the 2 men who understood its meaning. Then Johnny turned to camera one and delivered his famous closing line. "I bid you a very heartfelt good night." The photograph of Thomas Reed that Johnny had carried for 60 years now sits behind glass in New Orleans. Beside it is a handwritten note from Johnny's estate. "Some memories are too sacred to forget. Some friendships transcend death. And some stories must be told so that sacrifice is never forgotten." That note was written 3 days before Johnny died. He never forgot Thomas Reed. He never forgot the USS Pennsylvania. And after March 1978, he never let America forget either.